The median bank account balance in America is $8,000, not $80,000, $8,000. If you have more than that sitting in your checking or savings account right now, you are statistically wealthier than half the country. Let that sink in for a second. Half of all American households have less than $8,000 to their name in liquid savings. And yet, you know what's wild? The economy is supposedly doing great. The stock market hit record highs in 2025. Unemployment is low. Inflation has cooled off. And yet, if you're watching this video, there's a decent chance you feel like you're drowning financially. You're not crazy. The numbers tell a story that the headlines don't. I'm Nick, and I've spent the last few months digging through Federal Reserve data, consumer finance reports, and surveys that paint a picture of American wealth that will probably shock you. Because while the headlines scream about economic growth and rising wages, the numbers beneath the surface tell a completely different story. Let's talk about what's actually happening in the average American's bank account in 2026, and more importantly, where you stand in all of this. Here's the stat that should make your stomach drop. 67% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck right now. 2/3 of the country. And before you assume this is just minimum wage workers struggling to get by, think again. This includes people making six figures, lawyers, engineers, mid-level managers, all trapped in the same cycle. They get paid, the money evaporates into rent or mortgage, car payments, groceries that somehow cost double what they did 4 years ago, and by the time the next paycheck rolls around, they're at zero again. It's not a poverty problem, it's a structural trap that's swallowing the middle class whole. But it gets darker. Nearly 1 in 4 Americans, 24% to be exact, have literally zero emergency savings. Nothing. Not a rainy day fund, not a cushion, nothing between them and financial catastrophe. If the car breaks down, if they get sick, if the water heater explodes, they're immediately in crisis mode. And it's not because they're reckless, it's because there's nothing left over to save after covering the basics. Meanwhile, 54% of households have no dedicated retirement savings at all. None. They're not planning for the future because they can't afford to survive the present. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, inflation. You've probably heard that inflation has come down, that things are getting better. Technically, that's true. The rate of increase has slowed, but here's what they don't tell you. The damage is already done. Prices for goods and services are roughly 25% higher today than they were in 2020. A 25% markup on everything. Your grocery bill, your insurance, your rent, all of it is a quarter more expensive than it was just a few years ago. And wages? They didn't jump 25%. Most people got maybe a 10% raise if they were lucky. The gap between what things cost and what people earn has widened into a chasm, and nobody's building a bridge. The vibe is off, and people know it. 32% of Americans expect their personal finances to get worse in 2026. That's the highest level of financial pessimism recorded since 2018. Think about that. Despite all the good news on paper, 1/3 of the country is looking at the year ahead and thinking, I'm about to get crushed. They're not wrong. The split screen economy is real. If you own assets, stocks, real estate, you probably had a great 2025. Your net worth went up on paper, but if you live off wages alone, if you're trading your time for a paycheck and trying to make it stretch, you're statistically likely to be falling further behind. And here's the kicker. Americans were asked what they'd need to feel wealthy in 2026. The number they came up with? They get $2.5 million in net worth. That's not retire and never work again money. That's just feel wealthy money. The number people say they need to retire comfortably has hit $1.26 million. Let that sink in. The average person believes they need over $1 million saved just to stop working without panicking. And yet, as we're about to see, the actual retirement savings of most Americans is nowhere close to that, not even in the same galaxy. So where do you actually stand? Because here's the thing, averages lie. When you hear that the average American has $91,000 saved for retirement at age 40, that sounds decent, right? But that number is skewed by the people at the top. The guy with $2 million saved drags the average up, making everyone else look better than they are. What you actually want to know is the median, the point where half the people are above and half are below, the real middle. Let's break it down by age because this is where it gets uncomfortable. If you're under 25, the median retirement savings is about $2,800. That's not a typo. $2,800 for people aged 25 to 34. It jumps to around $15,000. Still not enough to retire on, obviously, but it's a start. By 35 to 44, the median hits about $35,500. Now, if you're 40 years old and you've got $40,000 saved, you might look at the average of $91,000 and feel like you're way behind, but you're not. You're actually ahead of the median American. You're doing better than half the country. Things get slightly better as people age. The 45 to 54 crowd has a median of about $61,500 saved. People aged 55 to 64, the ones staring retirement in the face, have a median of $87,500. And those 65 and older, already retired or about to be, have around $88,500. Let me be clear. Okay, $88,000 is not enough to retire on. If you're pulling 4% a year, that's $3,500 annually. That's $291 a month. You can't live on that. Social Security helps, sure, but the average Social Security check is only about $1,900 a month. Add that to your savings drawdown, and you're looking at maybe $2,200 a month to live on. That's tight, really tight. Now let's talk about debt, because savings are only half the equation. Debt is the anchor dragging everyone down, and it's distributed unevenly across generations. Gen Z, the youngest adults aged 18 to 28, have an average debt load of about $34,000. That sounds manageable until you realize it's mostly student loans and car payments, and they're just starting their careers. Millennials aged 29 to 44 are carrying an average of $132,000 in debt. Mortgages are the big driver here, but also student loans that never seem to go away, and credit cards filling the gap between income and expenses. But the real debt champions, Gen X, people aged 45 to 60 are carrying an average of $158,000 in debt, the highest of any generation. They're the sandwich generation, paying for their kids' college while also helping their aging parents, all while trying to save for their own retirement that's rapidly approaching. They're getting squeezed from both ends, and the numbers prove it. Baby boomers aged 61 to 79 have an average debt of about $92,000, lower than Gen X, but still significant, especially for people who should theoretically be winding down. Many are still paying off mortgages or helping family members financially, and it's eating into whatever retirement cushion they manage to build. And then there's credit card debt, the trap that never stops taking. The average credit card balance for people who carry debt is nearly $7,000. But here's the stat that should terrify you. 46% of credit card holders do not pay off their bill in full every month. Nearly half the country is paying 20% interest or more on their balances. That's not debt. That's a tax on being broke. If you're carrying a $7,000 balance at 22% interest and only making minimum payments, you'll be paying that off for years while the bank collects thousands in interest. It's designed to keep you stuck. So how do you compare? Are you ahead of the median or behind? Are you part of the 67% living paycheck to paycheck, or have you managed to carve out some breathing room? The answer matters because understanding where you stand is the first step to changing it. And there's more to unpack here because the numbers get even more revealing when you zoom in on the financial behaviors and choices people are making right now. Let's dig into what people are actually doing with their money right now because the behavior patterns reveal something fascinating. It's not just about how much you have, it's about the choices being made under financial pressure, and those choices are creating a cascade effect that's making everything worse. First, the savings rate. Americans are currently saving about 3.5% of their income. That's pathetically low. The historical average is closer to 8%, and financial experts recommend at least 20% if you want to build actual wealth. But 3.5%, that means for every dollar you earn, you're keeping 3.5 cents. The rest evaporates into expenses, debt payments, and the black hole of daily living costs. This isn't laziness. This is people getting crushed by the math of modern life. Why is the savings rate so low? Because people are making a brutal choice: save for the future or survive the present. And survival is winning. When your rent jumped 30% over 3 years, when groceries cost 25% more than they did in 2020, when your car insurance somehow doubled for no apparent reason, you don't have spare cash to sock away. You're not building wealth, you're plugging holes. Now let's talk about housing, because this is where the squeeze becomes truly visible. If you're a renter, you're statistically screwed. Nearly 50% of renters reported difficulty paying their monthly rent in 2025. Not it's tight, but genuine difficulty. The kind of difficulty where you're choosing between rent and other necessities. The median rent in America hit about $2,000 a month. If you're making the median household income of around $75,000, that rent is eating 32% of your gross income. Financial advisors say you shouldn't spend more than 30% on housing. Most renters are already over that line before they pay for anything else. Homeowners aren't exactly living in paradise either. If you bought a house in the last 3 years, you're probably locked into a mortgage rate between 6% and 8%. That's double what people were paying in 2020. A $400,000 mortgage at 7% costs you about $2,660 a month just in principal and interest. Add property taxes, insurance, and maintenance, and you're looking at $3,500 to $4,000 monthly. For a household making $100,000, that's half your take-home pay going to one asset. But here's the twisted part. If you already own a home, especially one you bought before 2020, your net worth probably looks fantastic on paper. Like home values shot up, the stock market hit record highs, your 401k statement makes you feel rich, but you can't eat equity. You can't pay your electric bill with unrealized stock gains. So you've got this bizarre situation where someone's net worth increased by $200,000, but they still feel broke because their monthly costs are strangling them. This is what I mean by the split screen economy. Turn on CNBC and you'll see headlines about the S&P 500 breaking records, unemployment staying low, GDP growth looking solid. Everything seems fine. But talk to actual people and they'll tell you they're drowning. Both things are true simultaneously. The economy is doing great. The people are not. Credit cards are filling the gap and it's turning into a disaster. Remember that $7,000 average balance? Let's run the math on what that actually costs. If you're paying 22% interest, which is pretty standard now, and you're only making minimum payments of about $140 a month, it'll take you 94 months to pay that off. That's almost 8 years, and over that time, you'll pay $6,160 in interest alone. You'll pay nearly double what you originally borrowed. The credit card companies know this. They're counting on it. That's their business model. They make billions off people who are too broke to pay off their balances, but desperate enough to keep charging. And it's getting worse because the psychology of credit cards is vicious. When you're stressed about money, when you're tired from working 2 jobs, when you're trying to keep your kid in decent shoes and your car running, you stop tracking every purchase. You swipe the card and deal with it later. Later becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. Suddenly, you're one of the 46% carrying a balance, paying interest on pizza you ate 6 months ago. Debt is also preventing people from making smart financial moves. Let's say you're carrying $132,000 in debt like the average millennial. A huge chunk of that is probably your mortgage, which is fine. That's leverage on an appreciating asset. But you've also got $30,000 in student loans at 6%, a car payment of $500 a month at 9%, and maybe $8,000 on credit cards at 20%. Your minimum debt payments alone are probably $2,500 a month. That's $30,000 a year going out the door just to service debt. not to build wealth, not to invest, just to not fall further behind. This is why people can't save. This is why emergency funds don't exist for most households. Every dollar that could go toward building a cushion is already spoken for. It's allocated to debt payments, inflated living costs, and the increased price of just existing. You're not falling behind because you're irresponsible. You're falling behind because the system is extracting more from you than it used to, and your income hasn't kept pace. The numbers prove it. Adjusted for inflation, wages have barely budged in 20 years for most workers, but costs have exploded. Healthcare, education, housing, childcare, the big unavoidable expenses that you can't just cut out of your budget. Those have all outpaced wage growth by massive margins. So even if you're making more money nominally than your parents did at your age, you're actually poorer in real terms because your purchasing power has been shredded. This is why so many people feel gaslit when they hear about how strong the economy is. If you're a homeowner who bought before 2020 and you've got money in the stock market, yeah, you probably had a great year. Your net worth went up. But if you're a renter trying to break into home ownership, or if you're living off wages without significant investments, the economy isn't working for you. It's working against you. This is the tale of two economies playing out in real time. So where does that leave most people in 2026? Let's talk about the savings rate, because this number is genuinely alarming. The personal savings rate, which measures how much of their income people are putting away, has dropped to around 3.5%. That's pathetically low. Historically, Americans saved closer to 8 or 9%. During the pandemic, when stimulus checks hit and people couldn't spend on travel or restaurants, the savings rate briefly spiked to over 30%. But now, we're back to barely saving anything. That 3.5% tells you everything you need to know. People aren't choosing to save less. They can't afford to save more. Every dollar is already allocated before it even hits the bank account. Housing is the other massive pressure point that's squeezing people from both sides. If you're renting, you're getting destroyed. Nearly 50% of renters in 2025 reported difficulty paying their monthly rent, not struggling to save for a down payment, struggling to make rent at all. And if you're a homeowner, you might own your house, but you're probably locked in by your mortgage rate. If you bought when rates were 3%, you can't move now because selling means financing a new place at 7%. You're trapped. Your house isn't an asset you can leverage. It's a golden cage. The wealth gap isn't just widening, it's becoming a chasm. The people who own assets, who bought homes before prices exploded, who have retirement accounts invested in the market, those people are doing fine. Better than fine. Their net worth grew significantly in 2025. But if you don't own assets, if you're starting from zero, trying to get a foothold, you're running uphill into a hurricane. The starting line keeps moving further away. Here's what really gets me. The benchmark numbers we talked about earlier, those medians for retirement savings, those debt averages, those aren't aspirational goals. Those are survival metrics. And half the country isn't even hitting them. If you're 45 years old with $50,000 saved for retirement, you're ahead of the median, but you're still nowhere near where you actually need to be to retire comfortably. That $1.26 million number that Americans say they need to retire, at the median savings rate, most people will never get close. The system isn't designed for you to win anymore. It's designed to extract. Credit card companies profit when you can't pay off your balance. Landlords profit when housing costs consume 40% of your income. Employers profit when wage growth stays flat while productivity soars. You're not failing. You're being failed by a structure that prioritizes profit extraction over financial stability for working people. But here's what you can control. You can't fix the economy. You can't lower interest rates or make rent affordable. But you can stop measuring yourself against averages that are inflated by outliers. You can stop feeling behind just because some chart says you should have more. If you have anything saved, you're ahead of 24% of Americans who have nothing. If you're making progress on debt, even slowly, you're moving in the right direction. The economic landscape is harsh, but you are not powerless. Focus on the gap between what you earn and what you spend. That's your margin. That's your weapon. Even if it's small right now, that gap is what eventually becomes your emergency fund, your down payment, your escape hatch from paycheck to paycheck living. It won't happen overnight. It might take years, but the alternative is staying trapped in the cycle forever, and that's not an option. The numbers don't lie, but they also don't tell you what to do next. If you're sitting here realizing you're behind the median, or worse, way behind, don't spiral. The averages are broken. The system is extracting, but you're not powerless. Start small. Track the gap. Build the margin and stop comparing yourself to people whose wealth came from timing and luck you didn't have. You're not in a race against them. You're in a fight for your own stability, and that fight is worth winning.